It was a quiet day on the SS Horizon's Shield, a long-range rescue ship patrolling the farthest reaches of human-explored space. Captain Jessica Avery was sitting in the command chair, idly observing the distant nebula on the holoscreen. Space had been calm for weeks, almost too calm. Her crew, a small but highly skilled team of engineers, medics, and scientists, had grown restless. Suddenly, an alarm blared from the ship's main console. Jessica snapped to attention, immediately flipping switches and scanning the report. A distress signal, faint but unmistakable, was coming from a derelict ship not far from their position. Commander Marius, Jessica called out to her second-in-command, who had been studying star charts. "We've got a distress signal, alien origin. Bring up the details." Marius swiftly tapped at the console, and a blurry image of a large alien vessel appeared on the screen. It was an old model, rusted and battered, floating aimlessly in the void. "That's an Uldrek warship," Marius said, his voice betraying a hint of surprise. "They haven't been active in this sector for decades." The Uldrek were a warlike species, infamous for their brutality in battle. But this ship looked abandoned, its hull scared by battle and time. Jessica's curiosity piqued. "Send a recon drone to investigate," she ordered. Minutes later, the drone approached the warship, sending back real-time footage. The camera panned across the dilapidated ship's exterior until it focused on an open cargo hold. Inside, the crew could make out a large cage. A figure moved within, slow and pained. "Magnify that," Jessica said, leaning forward. The image zoomed in to reveal a massive, four-legged creature. Its fur was matted, and its body was covered in scars. The creature limped weakly, clearly injured and malnourished. "That's an Uldrek war dog," Marius said grimly. "They used them as brutal weapons in their conquests." Jessica's heart sank at the sight. The creature was no doubt a victim of the Uldrek's violent past, now abandoned like the ship it was trapped on. She made a decision. "Prepare the boarding team. We're bringing it on board." The boarding team assembled in the airlock, suited up and armed with tranquilizers. Jessica led the group, her eyes sharp and focused. She had dealt with dangerous animals before, but this felt different. There was something in the way that War Dog moved, something more than mere aggression. The team crossed over to the Uldrek ship, the clanking of their boots echoing through the silent corridors. The air was thick with the scent of rust and decay. As they approached the cargo hold, the sound of faint growls reached their ears. "There it is," Marius whispered. The war dog lay in the cage, its glowing red eyes tracking their every move. Its body was large, muscular, but its breathing was labored. Jessica slowly approached the creature, keeping her hands visible and calm. "Easy there, big guy," she murmured softly. She could see the pain in its eyes, the desperation for freedom. "Scan it," she ordered. One of the medics stepped forward, using a handheld scanner to assess the war dog's condition. "Multiple fractures, severe malnutrition, and several old injuries. This thing's been through hell," the medic reported. "We can't just leave it here," Jessica said firmly. "Sedate it, and let's get it back to the ship." As the tranquilizer took effect, the war dog's growls turned into soft whines. It slumped to the floor, unconscious but still breathing. "All right, let's move it out," Jessica said, feeling a wave of responsibility wash over her. Back aboard the SS Horizon's Shield, the war dog was placed in a secure medical bay. The crew watched anxiously as Dr. Lucia Reyes, the ship's head veterinarian, began treating its wounds. "This is unlike any creature I've ever worked on," Reyes said as she carefully cleaned the creature's scars. "But there's something about its biology that's fascinating. It's not just a weapon. There's intelligence here." Hours passed, and finally the war dog stirred. Jessica, Reyes, and Marius watched closely from behind a reinforced glass window. The creature's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time, it seemed, calm. It sniffed the air, its nose twitching as it scanned its unfamiliar surroundings. "Do you think it understands where it is?" Marius asked. "I don't know," Jessica replied, but it doesn't seem hostile right now. Let's see how it reacts." They opened the door to the medical bay cautiously. Jessica, with Reyes beside her, stepped inside. The war dog stood on shaky legs, its massive form towering over them. But instead of attacking, it simply stared at them, waiting. Jessica extended her hand slowly, her heart racing. The war dog sniffed her fingers, and then, to her surprise, it lowered its head as if in submission. "Looks like we've got ourselves a new friend," Reyes whispered, astonished. Days passed, and the war dog, now named Nova by the crew, began to recover. Its wounds healed rapidly under Reyes' care, and it started to eat again, regaining its strength. The once fearsome creature had become almost docile, following Jessica around the ship like a loyal companion. "It's strange," Jessica remarked to Marius one day. "I expected it to be more violent, considering its history." "I think it knows we saved it," Marius replied. "It's not just a mindless beast." Nova proved to be more than just a rescued animal. It was highly intelligent, understanding commands and even showing signs of affection towards the crew. But the mystery of why it was left behind on the Uldrek ship lingered in Jessica's mind. "Something doesn't add up," she said during a meeting with the senior staff. "The Uldrak wouldn't just abandon one of their war dogs unless something went terribly wrong." While investigating the logs recovered from the Uldrek ship, Marius uncovered disturbing information. The Uldrak had been engaged in a massive battle in this region of space, but something had gone horribly wrong. Their forces were decimated, and those who survived fled in terror, leaving behind anything they couldn't carry, including Nova. Jessica frowned as she read through the translated documents. This doesn't make sense. The Uldrak wouldn't run unless they were facing something far more dangerous than themselves. As they dug deeper, they found references to a biological weapon, a terrifying creature that had wiped out entire fleets. It was codenamed Xyros. "Xyros," Marius said, shivering. "Whatever this thing is, it's still out there." Nova, sensing their anxiety, growled softly from across the room. The war dog knew something they didn't, and Jessica was determined to find out what. Just as the crew of the SS Horizon's Shield began to unravel the mystery behind the Uldrak's sudden defeat, alarms erupted through the ship. The low, resonating sound echoed across every corridor, jolting the crew into action. Jessica leaped to her feet from the command chair, her heart pounding. The holo screen in front of her flickered to life, showing a growing number of red blips on the radar. Uldrak warships, and lots of them. "A massive fleet has entered the system," Lieutenant Hale called out from the navigation console. "We've got at least a dozen battleships, and they're heading straight for us. They're not broadcasting any identification codes, Captain. No hails. Looks like they aren't here to talk." Jessica's jaw tightened. The Uldrak weren't known for diplomacy, but this was a show of force unlike anything they'd ever encountered from the alien race. "Prepare for battle stations," she ordered, her voice steady but commanding. The crew moved in unison, with years of military discipline kicking in as consoles lit up and defense systems reared to life. Shields were raised, weapons charged, and the ship braced for the inevitable confrontation. Jessica's mind raced. Why would the Uldrak return now, and in such overwhelming numbers? Then the realization hit her like a cold wave. Nova. The Uldrak weren't here by coincidence. They had come for their war dog. "Commander Marius," she called, not turning her gaze from the looming ships on the screen. "Get a message to engineering. I want every system operating at full capacity. Shields, weapons, engines, everything." Marius, standing nearby with a furrowed brow, glanced at the war dog that stood resolutely beside Jessica. Nova was fully recovered now, its once weak frame bristling with energy. The massive creature growled low in its throat as if sensing the approaching danger. "We saved one of their war dogs," Marius said grimly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it looks like they want it back." Jessica clenched her fists. She knew what would happen if they handed Nova over. Another round of violent servitude, forced to fight for a species that treated it like a mindless weapon. That wasn't an option. Nova had become more than just a rescued animal. It was a part of their crew now, and Jessica had no intention of giving it up without a fight. On the main display, the Aldrich ships slowed their advance as they reached striking distance, their imposing black hulls shimmering in the distant light of a nearby star. For a moment, there was silence, and the tension in the command deck was palpable. The Aldrak were making their move, but they weren't attacking yet. "Captain, incoming transmission," Hale announced. "Put it through." The screen flickered and shifted to reveal an Aldrak commander standing tall in the center of a massive war room, his armored figure imposing even through the transmission. His reptilian features were contorted into a sneer, sharp teeth gleaming as his eyes locked onto Jessica. "Humans," the Aldrich commander spat, his voice gravelly and cold. "You have something that belongs to us. Surrender the war dog you've stolen, and we'll let your ship leave this system unharmed. Resist, and we will obliterate you." Jessica squared her shoulders, her expression hard. She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "We didn't steal anything," she replied, her tone defiant. "We rescued Nova after you abandoned it to die. We won't hand it over to you." The Aldrak commander's eyes flashed with fury. "That creature is a product of our military, human. It is not yours to protect. Return it to us, or face the consequences." In the silence that followed, Nova let out a low growl, its glowing eyes narrowing at the sight of the Aldrak commander. It could sense the animosity, the danger, perhaps even recognize its former master. Jessica glanced down at the war dog and then back at the screen. "I'm sorry," Jessica said, her voice unwavering, "but we don't abandon our own. Not even Nova." The Aldrich commander let out a harsh laugh, the sound cutting through the static of the transmission. "Then you've chosen death, Captain." Before Jessica could respond, the transmission cut off, and the Aldrich ships surged forward. Hale's voice rang out, panic creeping into his tone. "They're powering up their weapons. Incoming attack. All hands, brace for impact," Jessica shouted. The ship lurched as the first volley of plasma blasts slammed into the shields, lighting up the screens with bursts of fiery red. The hull groaned under the strain, but the shields held for now. "Return fire," Jessica ordered. The ship's automated turrets sprang to life, launching a counteroffensive of pulse cannons and missile barrages. The space around them erupted into a dazzling display of weapon fire as both sides exchanged blows. The crew worked furiously, adjusting shield frequencies, firing on weak points in the Aldrak formation, and scrambling to keep the ship in one piece. Nova paced restlessly beside Jessica, its growls growing louder with every strike against the ship. The war dog's instincts were kicking in. It was ready to fight. "Captain, we're outnumbered 3-1, Marius warned as he scanned the tactical display. "We can't take this kind of firepower for long." Jessica's mind raced. They were in a desperate situation, but surrender was not an option. She had to think of something, and fast. "Hale," she said, her voice tight, "can we use the nearby asteroid field to our advantage?" Hale glanced at his console, eyes scanning the star maps. "Yes, Captain. The asteroid field is dense, and it could give us cover, but it's risky. One wrong move and we'll be smashed to pieces." Jessica nodded. "We'll take the risk. Plot a course through the asteroid field. We'll lose them in there." As Hale punched in the coordinates, Jessica turned to Marius. "Prepare Nova for deployment. If we can't outrun them, we'll need every advantage we can get, including our newest crew member." Marius hesitated for a moment. "Are you sure, Captain? Nova's still recovering." "I'm sure," Jessica interrupted. "Nova's stronger than we think." Marius nodded and rushed off to prepare. Jessica looked at the war dog, her hand resting on its thick fur. "Are you ready, Nova? Because this is going to get rough." Nova's response was a low, confident growl. It understood what was coming, and it wasn't afraid. It was ready to fight for the people who had given it a second chance. The SS Horizon's shield dove into the asteroid field, weaving between massive chunks of rock and ice. The Aldrich ships followed, their relentless pursuit undeterred by the hazardous terrain. Plasma blasts zipped past the ship, some narrowly missing the asteroids and others smashing into them, sending debris flying in all directions. Jessica gripped her chair as the ship rocked from side to side, narrowly dodging the floating obstacles. "Stay sharp, everyone," she called out. "We're not out of this yet." The asteroids provided some cover, but the Uldrich fleet was closing in. Their battleships were designed for combat, not finesse, and they were struggling to navigate the tight spaces, but their firepower was still overwhelming, and every hit weakened the Horizon's shield further. "Captain, shields are down to 30%, Marius reported grimly. Jessica's mind raced for a solution. The asteroid field had bought them time, but not enough. They needed something more, an edge, a distraction, anything to turn the tide of battle. Then she looked at Nova, who stood at the ready. The war dog was more than a distraction. It was their secret weapon, and soon the Uldrak would learn just how dangerous it could be. The tense hum of the ship's systems echoed across the command deck of the Asterisk SS Horizon's Shield Asterisk. The Uldrich fleet had paused, but the danger had not passed. A transmission blinked on the holoscreen, signaling another message from the Uldrak commander. Jessica steeled herself for what was to come. She knew their demands before the message even began, but hearing it out loud solidified her resolve. The face of the Uldrak commander appeared once again. His reptilian eyes narrowed with fury. "This is your final warning, human. Return the war dog, or we will reduce your ship to space debris. You have 5 minutes to comply." Jessica turned to her crew. The decision had already been made, but she wanted them to hear it from her. "We're not giving Nova up," she said firmly. Her voice carried the weight of authority, but beneath it there was something more, conviction. "That's not just an animal standing there. Nova is one of us now. We stand together." Nova, as if understanding her words, stood tall beside her. The war dog's imposing figure was no longer the weak and abandoned creature they had found. Its fur gleamed under the lights of the ship, muscles taut and eyes focused, ready for the fight ahead. There was no fear in the creature's stance, only loyalty and determination. It was a far cry from the tool of war it had once been, used and discarded by the Uldrak. Now it was part of something greater. Marius stepped forward, a determined look on his face. "We've faced worse odds before," he said, "and we've come out alive every time. We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We're fighting for Nova." The crew nodded in silent agreement. Everyone understood the stakes. This wasn't just about surviving another battle or outmaneuvering an enemy. This was about standing up for what they believed in, protecting the weak, even when the odds were stacked against them. Jessica glanced at the countdown timer on the screen. 2 minutes until the Uldrak would attack. The tension was thick, but she didn't flinch. "Get ready," she ordered. "Shields at maximum. All weapon systems online. We'll hit them with everything we've got." As the crew worked furiously at their stations, Nova paced back and forth beside Jessica, a low growl emanating from deep within its chest. It was ready to fight, but it was waiting for her signal. The timer ticked down. 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. The battle begins. The moment the countdown hit 0, the Uldrich fleet opened fire. Beams of plasma shot through space, slamming into the Asterisk Horizon's Shield Asterisk with a force that shook the entire vessel. The shields flared, absorbing most of the impact, but the crew felt the power of the assault. "Shields holding at 70%, Marius reported, his voice tense but controlled. "We can't take too many more hits like that." "Return fire," Jessica commanded. The ship's weapons roared to life, launching a barrage of missiles and pulse cannons toward the nearest Uldrich battleship. The first volley hit its mark, the enemy ship's shields flickering under the onslaught. But the Uldrak were relentless, their ships moving in tighter, closing the gap between them and the Asterisk Horizon's Shield Asterisk. "They're trying to box us in," Hale called out. "We're running out of room to maneuver." Jessica's mind raced. They were vastly outnumbered, and the Uldrak's firepower was overwhelming. But surrender wasn't an option. There had to be another way. Her eyes flicked to Nova, who stood ready, muscles tense. "Commander Marius," she said suddenly, "get Nova to the drop pod." Marius blinked, caught off guard. "Captain, you're not seriously." "I am." Jessica cut him off. "Nova's our only chance. The Uldrak won't be expecting it." Marius hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Aye, Captain." Marius led Nova through the narrow corridors of the ship to the launch bay. The war dog moved with purpose, its glowing eyes sharp and alert. It knew something big was about to happen. As they reached the bay, Marius input the commands to prepare a drop pod for launch. The plan was risky, sending Nova directly into the heart of the Uldrak fleet, relying on its combat instincts and intelligence to cause chaos among the enemy ships. "Are you ready for this, Nova?" Marius asked, placing a hand on the war dog's side. He wasn't sure if Nova fully understood the gravity of what they were about to do, but the creature's steady gaze gave him all the reassurance he needed. Nova let out a low growl, its muscles rippling beneath its fur. It was ready. The drop pod sealed with a hiss, and Nova was strapped in, its massive form barely fitting inside the compartment. Marius hit the launch button, and with a loud whoosh, the pod shot out into space, streaking toward the Uldrak fleet. Inside the command deck, Jessica watched the radar as the drop pod streaked across the void. It was a gamble, but she trusted Nova's instincts. "Deploy decoys," she ordered. "Let's make it harder for them to track the pod." A series of decoy drones launched from the Horizon's Shield Asterisk, scattering across the battlefield and drawing the attention of several Uldrak ships. Meanwhile, Nova's drop pod slipped past the enemy lines unnoticed, heading straight for the largest Uldrak battleship. "Pod has reached the target," Marius reported. "It's showtime." As the drop pod made contact with the Uldrak ship's hull, it exploded open, and Nova leaped out, claws extended. The war dog landed with a thud on the enemy ship, its powerful legs absorbing the impact. In an instant, it was off, racing across the hull with incredible speed. Plasma bolts fired from the Uldrak ship's turrets, but Nova was too fast, dodging the blasts with ease. It tore into the ship's outer defenses, ripping through communications arrays and sensor modules with its razor-sharp claws. The Uldrak crew inside scrambled to respond, but Nova's ferocity and agility were unmatched. Back on the Horizon's Shield Asterisk, Jessica watched as the Uldrak formation began to falter. Their communications were being jammed, and the chaos caused by Nova's rampage was creating a gap in their defenses. "Now's our chance," Jessica said. "Target their command ship. Full power to forward cannons." The Horizon's Shield Asterisk surged forward, its pulse cannons lighting up as they fired in unison. The Uldrak command ship's shields flickered and then collapsed under the barrage. One final missile hit the bridge, and the massive vessel exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The remaining Uldrak ships, disoriented and leaderless, began to retreat. As the last Uldrak ship fled the system, the crew of the Horizon's Shield Asterisk let out a collective cheer. They had won, not just through human ingenuity and strength, but through their bond with Nova, an alien war dog that had once been their enemy. Together, they had stood against overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. Marius returned to the bridge with Nova by his side, the war dog's fur singed in places but otherwise unharmed. Jessica knelt beside the creature, running a hand through its fur. "You did good, Nova," she said softly. "You saved us all." Nova let out a contented growl, leaning into her touch. It wasn't just a tool of war anymore. It was family. And in the end, it wasn't just human ingenuity that saved the day. It was the loyalty and courage of an alien war dog, standing side by side with the people who had given it a second chance.